Okay, so here we are in the original scene that we had created last time, back in part 1. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use those trim sheets and I'm going to apply them directly to all these surfaces. And this is going to be a lot of just repetitive kind of work. Remember, if you want to know a little more about how this was done, there are a couple other videos that I've already made that talk about how it's done. So I'm going to just go through this kind of quickly and provide a running commentary on what's going on. If you have some questions about how it's done, go ahead and shoot me a message over on Discord and I'll see if I can answer it. Okay, I'm going to start by just commenting over this. This is a 10x speed of the original development. I think it took me about 3 hours to get through all this, something like that. So first thing I'm doing is I'm using this add-on called Slice It, and it basically cuts this grid into the object that you just saw. And the reason for that is that I don't want to use subdivision surfaces in this model because it's such a thin piece and you're going to get tons of subdivision surfaces on the side. So I use Slice It where I can just to give me a basic slice, not really dense, because I need to also be able to select those faces and move things around. And so you can see that's what I'm doing here, is I'm checking out how that slice is going to work. And as I look at this, I realize, okay, so I've got to separate some of these islands. And what I can do is I can select the faces, and with the faces selected, I can face them towards the camera and say project to view under UV menu, and it'll just put those faces directly in view on the left, and then I can just edit them there. The material I added here is the first material that we created in episode 3. And that's more of a wall-like material. You can see it here on the left, and it works pretty well. I'm liking how it looks. I can scale it and move it around and get it to where I like. It's one of the things that this technique is really strong with, is the ability to continually iterate and adjust the design. One of the things I also mentioned is that in the UV view, I'll always, in the bottom left-hand corner, I'll put the camera up. I'll put a little window there and I'll show the camera view so I can see what I'm working on from the camera perspective. I also should mention that I'm texturing all parts of the model, the right, the left, the top, and the bottom, because I'm going to have a camera fly through this in a video at some point. And so I'm going to use all parts of the model. Sometimes I'll just model the parts that are facing the camera, but in this case, I'll just use all of them. Here again, I'm using that Slice It add-on that we have to basically break it up first. And then I'll add a subdivision surface and a displace modifier on top of that, fill in that hole, because that's going to screw up this Slice It here. Now I'm adding the Slice It, there it goes. And then I add a subdivision surface, and you can see that works pretty good. Now I'm moving things around, and one of the things you'll notice is I'm moving around while the displace and the subdivision surfaces are on in edit mode. And a lot of times that works, but sometimes when things are getting slow, I'll turn the viewport viz of all those modifiers off so that I can still see the texture mapping going on, but I just don't want to be able to see that. So now I'm basically just separating out different objects from the collection of objects. So I want to break them out into little groups that I can work on individually. And especially these groups are going to have a different texture. They'll use that second texture that we made in episode 4. And so that's one of the reasons for separating them out. But the first thing I'll do is I'll just work on all these walls, get all the walls so they're lined up and working correctly. Okay. There's another one of the walls, had some extra edges that were left laying around. I deleted those. One of the things when you use Slice It, one thing that's always a good idea is to, after you've done a couple slices on an object, is to go ahead and edit it and merge the vertices, because sometimes it'll leave extraneous vertices around. Not much you can do about that. We probably should add that feature directly into Slice It. So now we're working with the second texture map on these objects. This is the second set of trim sheets. And I made the same mistake as I made in episode 4, where I had the right materials and everything, but what I forgot to do is I forgot to put the correct displacement map in. So I'm actually using the displacement texture from the trim sheet 1. What I need is the displacement from trim sheet 2. What you'll see right here, what I've done is a lot of times I select the front and the side, a looping area for an object. And that's important because you really don't want the artifacts to show up at the edges. So if you can grab a loop like I just showed you there, what you have is you have something that's much easier, and it'll work much better when you start adding slicing. Now here, you can see all these yellows are just too bright. These little yellow lights are too bright. So what I did is I added a Verona mask on them, and I've adjusted it so that they're not so bright anymore, because in the EEVEE rendering, they look like you can't see them. There's a problem with EEVEE, and that is that the farther you get away from an emission light, the dimmer it gets, to the point where you just quit seeing it. And so what that means is you really have to view it in the cycles mode if you want to see what the actual things will look like. And that's what I'm doing right here in the bottom left. And here I am moving islands around and adjusting the different parts. And I'm having a little bit of confusion in the sense that I'm recognizing that while the texture maps look great and they're working out right, the displacement's just not working correctly. And that's, again, because I have the wrong displacement texture applied, but I'll get to that here in a second. One thing I'll mention is that I use a lot of planar projections when I'm doing stuff like this piece right here. You can see it's been planar projected. I'll first select all the faces in an object and I'll cube project it. The first thing I'll do when I start out. And then after that, when that's done, I'll start moving things around if I don't like it. And sometimes I'll have to select things and either UV unwrap them or planar project them. There's little different things, but here you can see I'm going all the way down. I use this command, select flat faces. So basically I'll select, all I have to do is select one or two and I'll get all the rest of them. And when I get those, then I can just grab that and move that around to where I want it. And as you can see, that's exactly what I'm doing. And in this case, I'm doing it without the displace modifier showing. And that helps me out a lot since we do have the wrong displacement map in there. And one of the things this map has on it is it's got this nice display. So I can basically use that display and move it directly over the existing display, scale it and put it down, and I'll have a nice display right there. So it's one of the reasons for creating that display as part of that second trim sheet. When I cube mapped it, I got a lot of these little lights right there. You can see some of these, all these displays are showing up on parts. They're going to really screw with the displacement. So I really need to get rid of those and make sure I map those correctly on the image there. And here we are looking at it. And again, I'm trying to understand exactly what's going on. And I realized that I needed to adjust my lights. I got the lighting correctly on that texture. I'd already done the first one. You can see that texture looks a lot better now. I'm still trying to figure out the texture issue, but I do go in now and I'm working on the table. I slice it up nicely. I go back to this original object that I'm having the issues with. I start mapping all this stuff around and notice that I'm not using the displace mostly. I'm just using texture mapping, which allows me to go a lot faster, by the way. And the minute I turn on displacement, I get all this weird stuff going on. You can tell what's going on. You can see up at the top, all these little things poking through. So I basically go in and try and make sure I don't have any of these bright blue mappings. And once I find out that I got rid of all those and it's still popping through, then I realize, oh, okay. It turns out I probably have the wrong texture in this thing and I need to get that fixed. See right there, that white right there. So there's what I figured out. Once I've done that, I've swapped out that texture, but it turns out I actually swapped out the texture in texture.002. And what that did is it actually also swapped that out in all the other things I've already created. So I'm going to have to fix that as well. But now that I've got this, things are starting to look a lot better. And I'm looking at the table, and the table uses the first texture map. And I thought about switching to the second one. I really like the way it was looking. Even in the cube map, it looks pretty good. There's little I have to do. So right now I'm just going back in and making sure that I switch all those other textures back to from the walls to the texture 1 displacement map. So that works. Okay, now I'm moving on to some more of the objects. I'll go again and slice it to create the meshes. And then I'll jump in and start doing the thing I mentioned earlier, where I'm just going to select all of those things and I will project them and then move them around and get something that I like on that side of the object. So it's really a little bit of a tedious process going around and doing this, but it takes a little while to get things. A lot of times also when I just want something to go away or disappear, I'll select something like on a bottom I'll select all those faces and I'll just scale them to 0 in the UV window. And when I scale them to 0, basically what that does is I can position that over any color I want and it'll take on that color. So if I want to make it black, I can put that in black or just a gray, the medium gray color or whatever. So these are fun and interesting because a lot of times you can use like the little lighting, the little display maps to actually add lighting to your object as well. And so I start doing that in this particular instance is I'll use tiny little pieces of the display in certain polygons and certain faces, and it'll just create a nice little glow there that ends up looking pretty cool. One of the things I also mentioned is you may see, if you pause this or something, you may see that a lot of times I'll do a projected view, but I'll do it at a 45-degree from the face of the surfaces. So let me explain that a little better. If I have a cube, I may select the top face and one of the sides. And if I project from the top, I don't get the side. And if I project from the side, I don't get the top. But if I turn the whole thing 45 in the viewport and project it, I'll get both the top and the side. So that's interesting as well. There I'm just turning on the basically face orientation mode. And I've got a video on how you can set that up so that it only shows red and not the blue. And again, as I've talked about it, I think it was in episode 4, how you can use that to control the displacement mid-level. That's a real good tool for that. And it's one of the reasons why, again, I use this modifier approach for displacement as opposed to approach that's directly in the shader, is because I can use the same materials over and just adjust things in the modifier. So this obviously is a hyper detailed approach. And if you wanted to make it much simpler, all you need to do would be to just scale down your texture maps. This is an 8K. Remember, it's an 8K image that we have. So just scale down the texture maps so that they're smaller, and you'll end up with your islands. That's an island thing on the left. If you scale them down smaller, you'll have less detail. So the larger the island, the more detail, the smaller the island, the less amount of detail. This is the little shelf that I'm doing next. As you can see, that's the edges of the shelf. I cube mapped it and I just grabbed them and selected them and then just move it to where I want it, because I want a little bit of a detail around the edge. Okay, and here are the displays, and it's interesting. These things, when you cube map them, they actually work pretty well. And I was surprised with that. Basically, I needed to do a slice first. And then I can grab just the hood. There I am using that projection, that angled projection view you can see. And then I just take this and map it. And it actually worked surprisingly well. The cube map worked, I think, on the other one pretty well. But this one, I was surprised how quickly this worked. So I'm just moving things around and getting to where I think they're going to look correct. And here we are looking at the other one. And now, one of the things I don't show is I don't show how I got those displays on there. And what I did is I actually pulled the display face off of there, and I set that as a separate object. I went into local mode, and then I added some display textures that I have. I think they come with Design Magic. There's a whole bunch of display textures, and I just laid them one on top of the other on top of the other. They actually come in this blue color, and you can adjust the color in the shader. And I just like the blue color, but I think I have 3 on one and 5 on the other or something like that. So I just overlay them on top of each other, and they just work well. And that's how those were created. Sorry, I didn't show that, but I think that I had accidentally jacked the subdivision up to 9 on one thing, which was a mistake, and the thing crashed. And so I restarted it, but I forgot to turn recording back on. So anyway, that's what happened there. So now I'm just basically assigning materials to all of the different pipes and cables and everything. And now I want to take this one set of big pipes. I'm going to add a displacement map to it. And I think I'm going to use the number 1. Yeah, I'm using the first displacement map. I was going to actually first try and unwrap it. I finally just gave up on it because it was just going to be too hard. And I just ended up just doing a cube projection, which you can see right there. That's what they look like. And then I can just move them around. You can see they're faceted though. If you look at the top, they're all faceted. And I was looking at that for a while. I was changing. I did actually create a new material for this because I wanted it to be darker. And if you look up here, what I end up doing to create this more of a little surface, smooth surface, is I actually set this to Catmull Cark. Now, in this case, I didn't go through and decimate all the objects. I went ahead, I'm looking, I got 21 million. I can render 21 million without any trouble. If you look at all of these though, I punched up the render step, right? So each render step, maybe not that one, but most of these, the render step's been punched up. All these are punched up from 5 to, that might be 6. And that means that when you render them, it's going to render at a little higher quality. So let's take this one. Yeah, that one was not punched up. We'll do that one. And this one. Yeah, so I'll do that, and that will help me when I do the final rendering. See, is there anything else in here that's worth it? This right here was 4.5. This stuff is 4.5. These guys right here, 5.6. Okay, so they're all working well. This is a function of how well they look when I get into there and start looking at them closely. So if I go in here and I say, just on this object, I hit 6, we'll see that this will change quite a bit. It'll take a little time. There it is. So yeah, so you can see it gets a little more exact. Now here's where I use one of those little light things that's going to actually glow from a distance. It'll glow. Now, if I want to make that more accurate, I could have done that as well. I might like just go into local mode and look at this and separate each one of these if I wanted to. And if I'm going to turn on face orientation, you can see where we're breaking out. So I might say the mid-level and this is set at 0.4, let's say 0.2. And it's probably a good idea to do that with levels set at a smaller number. Let's do 4 or 5. We'll do 5. But yeah, so 0.2 kind of gives a little crisper version of what's going on. But then I got to look at the rest of these and make sure they're not getting too out of hand. Maybe 0.2 is blowing it up more. Let's say if I do 0.5, what does that do? That's going to shrink it down. So now I'm starting to get this kind of weird stuff going on. So 0.4 may have been the right one. Let's put that there and see what yeah, that looks like it works pretty good. So get a little bit of weirdness. Yeah, I've got a little weirdness going on here and I can fix that. All I need to do is just go in and adjust those maps. If I go back into UV editing, for instance, and look at this, turn off wireframe, and we'll look at what we have here. It's this one right here. So we'll turn off viewport viz and we'll see what we have and turn it on. So I can basically say that somewhere in here, I've got some map issues. Let's just go ahead and fix it real quick. So I'm going to select this and say Q and link flat faces right there. And I'll select this one, that one as well. And this, I'm just going to grab all this tiny stuff here because it's the small stuff is what gets you. And I'm just going to show you typically how I'll do this is I can say U and I can say unwrap. It doesn't really matter because here it is over here, right? So if I want to, I can select all A and on my UV squares, I can say to grid by shape. It'll make things square, which it didn't do a very good job of there, but I don't care about that because all I really want to do is do scale 0. And then I'm going to move it somewhere over here. And I'm actually using the wrong map. I want to go back to that's the trim 1. I want trim 2. So this is the right map. So I'm going to put it over here. And if we look at this, we'll see that now this is all one color. And when I go back into my displacement map, viewport viz, okay, it's popping out. So let's show you how I troubleshoot this. Let's go back in here and viewport viz this off, tab into it. So we've got some other stuff going on here. So I'm going to grab this and this and this. So I'll grab some of these and let's go back in here, see what that looks like. So if I go over here, I see that's going across there. So I'm going to say A, G, and I'm going to move these over to something like this. Tab, viewport viz this. Okay, and that fixed the problem. Not a huge issue. And if I want viewport viz, I can basically take these and I can scale them down, or I could do something like maybe this, where I'm actually going to match that other grid in a way, viewport viz. And over here, I've also mapped this to a show overlays, so I can turn off overlays and see. So anyway, I think you get the idea of how that's working. That's how you would troubleshoot something like that. Okay, let's go into the rendering now. Let's talk about the rendering. I'm going to go back into layout. And let's get out of here. Here. So I'm looking at this. One thing I might mention, something I didn't record, but I just took this floor and I just grabbed it. I sliced it, grabbed a section of it, and took that section and separated it, and then added a material to it as well. So there's that. And then there's this guy. I created him earlier using the dummy, and he's basically another one of these hyper detailed displacement map characters. And you can see there. Works pretty good. And he's just sitting over in the corner here. And I lit this pretty well the way I wanted to. Actually, I use this compositing setup as well. This is the final render over here, you can see. But I use this compositing setup that I use. So this time I bypassed the mist control, the film grain, and the vignette. I just wanted this kind of matching a little bit over here. I actually went into Photoshop a little bit and tweaked it just a tad bit, not much, just to get the final one. But this is really it. Basically, I jacked up the curves a little bit, added some glare to get a little of that. This is, you can see that's the difference between the render, and that's the color toned version of it. And then I just basically adjust, you can see right here, just adjust the saturation up just a tiny bit, turn off brightness contrast. And that's really all I'm doing to that. Okay, so let's walk you through actually texturing one of these objects. This one right here, this display is not acting right. And that's because I never did get around to texturing it right. I thought I did, but I didn't get to it. So let's go ahead, go into UV editing. As I mentioned, I've got over here, I've got my scene view. So in case I ever needed to see that, it's there. And I just hit the local view twice. The image in the UV window is only for reference. You can use any image. We need to choose the correct color map so we can see where things are going. So let's go ahead and first things first, let's just go in here and viewport viz. So that's what we have right there without the displacement maps. And you can see that may be just good enough the way it is, but let's just go ahead and use the displacement maps. I'm going to make sure I turn my overlays on, and I'm going to go A and X, and I'm going to say limited dissolve, limited dissolve, and make it 1. So the reason why I did this was I wanted to show you how we use slice it to slice these things up. So here's our object, pretty straightforward, nothing too fancy. I'll go into slice it, and I'm going to make this say 20, and I want to slice in the XYZ, and I'm going to turn on wireframe, right? You know where wireframe is. That's under here, wireframe. So this turns that on. I turn that on so I can see what's going on, and XYZ, and say slice it. And there's my grid. I'm going to tab into it, merge by distance, remove two vertices. So it's no big deal. So let's hit and get rid of this. So now that we have this done, we've got our grid, our proper grid. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's turn off wireframe, tab into this, and let's select just the outside stuff. So I'll do that by using my circle select here. Just grab this and okay. And then when I've done that, I have it mapped to a quick key, this select linked flat faces. So I have that mapped to a Q key. So I just go in here and say link flat faces, and I have all these selected. Now, with these selected, I typically just work like this, but if I ever want to make that selection again without having to go through all that hassle, and that was a bit of a hassle, what I can do is just go ahead and create a vertex group and assign it. So there's that. Now, if I project it from the top, I won't get the sides, and if I project it on the sides, I won't get the top. But if I go at a 45 and say U, project from view, and then hit A to grid by shape. Okay, gotta make sure I hit A first, and I get all that. And now all of this is lined up, hit A again, and I can rotate it around and get something that's going to work for me. And I just really am looking at this side over here because that's the side that I'm going to be seeing mostly, I think. So let's just go see what I got and get as I move it around. So as you can see, it's not working very well. So what I'm going to do is, with all these selected, I'm going to say select loops, select boundary loop. Okay, so I've got that set now. And with the boundary loops selected, I'm going to say Control E, mark seam. And then I'm going to grab that one. And where's the other seam? The other seam looks like it's right here. Control E, mark seam. Okay. Then I'll go in here and I'll go back to 3 mode and I'll just select all that stuff that we had. And the way I could also do that is I can just go L. I can just hit L now because I've actually marked those boundary loops. And once that's done, I can say U, unwrap, and it's going to give me this. And so this is this one. And I can say, hey, G, I can move this one around how I want it. That's nice. See how that goes around? Yeah. So I like that. And then I'll grab this one and say L. And I'm going to say 2 grid by shape. Let's straighten that out a little bit. And that's what we have. Now let's tab into this and hit L and let's hide these. And let's just grab that back one. I'm going to hit L and I'm going to scale this over here to 0 and just move it to a gray spot. And then I'm going to hide that. And now I have the rest of this stuff. And all I'm going to do with this is I'm going to say A, U, hue projection, scale 0, enter, G, there. And so that's no texture whatsoever on it. And then I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to say viewport viz and let's turn this on and see what we have. So we have some nice stuff. We have this issue over here. That's a problem. And I'll fix that, Shift H or Alt H to show everything there. We have a problem with these guys here. So that one right there. So I'll just go Shift right there and say scale 0 and G, move that out of the way. So that's not going to be a problem. And is there any others that are like that? Yeah, we probably might have some in here. Let's go L and then Shift H just to show that. Yeah, so we got this right here. So here, G, just move that over something like that. And right here, this, yeah, I think we're going to have a problem with this too. So let's take this and that and move that over here, something like that. Okay, so I think that's going to be fine. Usually you're working at right angles, so you don't have this problem with these lines being crazy like that. And then we turn this on, and this is looking much better. Okay, so let's turn off our, let's tab into this. Now the last thing I'll do, I'm going to grab these guys here. So turn these off and that one, and that one. And we'll say Q, link FLAC faces. And then we'll say, I can actually Shift 7. That puts them on perpendicular to this view and say U, project from view. So that's perfect. Now there they are. And I can go over here and just hit the L button while I'm hovering over that and say G and move that. I want it to be gray on the outside, but black on the inside. Scale Y, that. And then we'll go over here, hit L, that one, something like, let's try that. And L. Okay, let's see what these look like when we turn on our viewport viz. So yeah, we got a bunch of stuff jumping out because of the way those are, but I don't really care about that because I've got a display in front of that. So that doesn't matter to me. So yeah, I'm going to get a little better. This is a little weird. So okay. And I think that's it. Let's go back into here and let's look at our model inside of here. Yeah. And that looks, yeah, that looks fine. I might change the mid-level on this from 0.3 to 0.42. Yeah, that gives it a little crispier edge. 0.4. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so hopefully that helps show how that works. That was much more difficult than these other ones that are rectilinear. That one's a little bit more difficult, but actually that was good because you got to see some of the different techniques that were used. So let's, next we'll take a look at the render. Okay, so now we're in the render. I think I mentioned I've already gone ahead and basically made these level these up a little bit. That one's 4, this one should be 4 here. And basically all of these have been leveled up 1 in the render. And I've set it up so we've now got like 21 million. So we level them up, it's probably going to be around 50, 60 million. But here's my VRAM right here. I've got 24 gigabytes because I've got a 3090. So if you don't have as big a board, you're going to want to maybe modify these numbers a little bit on the downside. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and render it. I've got my compositing work set up. We went over that, and let's just go ahead and render it. I'm rendering it at 150% of 14. So it's almost the size of I guess it's a little HD, a little higher than HD. This size came from the actual original sketch that we had done. That's where this came from. So I'm going to do 150% of that. And I'll just hit the render button, and then we'll come back when we're done. So here's our finished full resolution render. It turned out pretty good, I think. It came out pretty much the way I wanted it to. And as I said, this has been a fun exercise. I enjoyed using Midjourney to help me come up with the concept, and then I used Perspective Plotter from Blender Market to match that actual sketch directly into a perspective here. And then I just basically roughed out some shapes and then used Flex to create a couple different trim maps. So these two different trim maps. And then basically there's 2 materials, actually a third material if you count this one for this pipe right here. I just made that darker, but there's really only 2 basic materials. That's just a color variation of one of them. So I hope you found this instructive and continue to keep working on this technique. I think it's got a lot of opportunity to go further. So we'll have to play with it. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you online. Bye.